go in to get my assignment. In the cafeteria office, a guard asked, "You got good handwriting?" Actually, my handwriting was superb. I'd spent years perfecting it. I'd even invented several of my own fonts. In high school, I was always helped to create school signage, and I learned early on that teachers were reluctant to mark up a beautifully written assignment. I loved the praise that came along with fastidious manuscripts. The notes teachers wrote, beautifully written, a pleasure to read. If only all my papers were so neat. Inspired me to strive for even greater perfection. Penmanship is one of my strong suits, I told the guard. He handed me a menu of the day's meals and a set of dry eraser markers. Write the menu on the board in the patient cafeteria, he said. Right through there, he added, pointing to the door. As I walked through the kitchen, I saw an inmate stirring a huge pot of soup. He noticed the markers and yelled, "Write big, because them lepers can't see worth a shit." I would think twice before bragging again. I pushed through the heavy swinging door and saw them, 50, maybe 60 leprosy patients sitting at the tables. I scanned the room for other inmates, but I was the only one. The menu board was on a wall on the opposite side of the room. I kept my eyes on the floor as I moved through a maze of wheelchairs and walkers, canes and crutches. An Asian man sat at a table in the middle of the cafeteria. He stared at me as I approached. A white growth completely covered one of his eyes. Between his two digitless hands, he balanced a pork chop. His good eye followed me as I walked. The skin around his mouth and chin were covered in a dark blue ointment, and his hands were shaped like mittens. I didn't want to stare, but I couldn't help myself. The pork chop slipped from his grip and fell onto his plate. He mumbled something, his mouth full of chewed meat. I was imprisoned in the last leprosarium in America for a year, and that's what this book is about. For most of the 20th century, anyone in North America who contracted leprosy was sent against their will to a colony in South Louisiana, just 15 miles south of Baton Rouge, in a town called Carville, Louisiana. They were treated like inmates. They were quarantined against their will. They were not allowed to vote. They were made to change their names. They couldn't leave the colony. Their mail was baked. They weren't allowed in order to sterilize it, they weren't allowed to marry. Yes?
Did you know that you were going to go to prison with the lepers before you went, or?
No, that's a great question, too. It was pre-internet. I assumed that I was going to a regular prison. And the judge who sentenced me was a law school classmate of my father's. I mean, it's just kind of how Mississippi works. And he sentenced me to 18 months, so I'd end up spending about a year in the prison. And he let me self-surrender, so I packed a leather bag with racquetball rackets, tennis shoes, shorts, like I was going to camp. And I showed up there. My wife dropped me off at noon on a Monday, May 3rd, 1993. And I was waiting for a guard to come collect me sitting on a bench. And I saw a man limping down the hallway. And he stopped at the corner window and waved, and he had no fingers. And that was the first time I knew that everything was awry. So, and I learned pretty quickly. An inmate who worked for landscape services had a four-wheeler, and he came rolling up to me as soon as I was walking through the courtyard that first time after being admitted. And they called him Dog Man. He howled like a dog a lot. These are the kind of people you encounter. So he rolled up to me on this thing, howled like a dog, and said, "You know they got lepers here." I said, "Well, I've heard that." He said, "You're a convict, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "That makes you a leprechaun." And then, then he howled like a dog and rolled